Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Artificial Intelligence Can Improve Human Resource Management and Talent Development. My name is Abby Dean. I'm the editor of Advantage Business Media's Manufacturing.net, and I'll be moderating today's event. Before we get started, I'd first like to thank our sponsor, AI Works by Works Applications, who made this event possible. I'd also like to thank our wonderful speakers and all of you, our audience, for joining us today for this educational webinar. Now, before introducing today's speakers, I want to encourage the audience to take full advantage of the interactive nature of this webinar platform. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation by simply typing your question into the aptly named Ask a Question box on your screen. We will be saving all questions for our speakers until the end of the presentation, and we'll do our very best to answer them in the time we have left. Now, business aside, let's move on and meet today's speakers. First, I'm excited to introduce Ray Jimenez. Ray is the Chief Learning Architect of VFT's Learning and Performance Systems in TrainingMagNetwork.com, a performance-driven social networking system. Ray began his career in organization development as well as in the training and development of learning systems with John Clements Consultants and Coopers & Lybrand. Ray is also the author of the book 3-Minute Learning and the soon-to-be-published book Training Impacts: How Micro-Learning Goals Lead to Huge Dollar Returns. Ray, thanks so much for being here today. It's wonderful to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Our second speaker today is Zsolt Olah. Zsolt is the Director of Innovation and Learning Solutions at Performance Development Group, where he and his team develop innovative learning and performance solutions that drive business results. His passion for machine learning began 25 years ago when he first built his own artificial neural network, and since then, Zsolt has contributed to the success of learning and development at companies like IBM, Pepsi, Oracle, and Comcast. He's also a frequent speaker at conferences and, as luck would have it for us, webinars. Welcome, Zsolt. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Abby.
Of course, welcome. And with introductions aside, Zsolt, I'm going to turn things over to you, so take it away.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Zsolt Olah. I'm the second one in the picture. 20 years in HR, passionate about learning, but you hear obviously our first part of the presentation. I'm also an engineer by trade, and as Abby mentioned in my little intro, 25 years ago, I built this artificial neural network, machine learning technically, for my thesis. It took about 4 or 5 weeks for this artificial neural network to run over and over again until I could graduate. So it was a great experience ever since. I've been in the industry seeing what miracle can happen when we have AI and HR together. So thanks so much for joining us for this exploration of the fascinating relationship between AI and HR. In my first part of this presentation, we're going to ask a couple of questions, something very fundamental about HR and the relationship between AI. So the first question is, why are we here at all? If you've been around the last 5 years, technology-wise, you see influx of articles, research, publications, conferences around AI. But it's not only for us geeks who like to have new shiny platforms. If you look at the business case, it was the last 5 years probably when this industry was taking off. $14 billion had been invested in the last 5 years into AI of various applications of it, from auto industry to Siri and all the personal assistants that you use today. By 2020, that number is going to reach $54 billion. So it's not just us geeks anymore, it's the business that sees that as a lot more powerful technology that we've ever seen. And we look at this a little bit about a different perspective in this presentation. Not as much as the technology itself and the features, but more like from the human perspective. What is AI to do with HR, and what our goal is going to be in the next couple of years to come when this technology is going to be available for everyone. So with that, let's ask the question, who is AI? And I deliberately put the who there and not the what. because what we like to explore is more like the relationship between AI and people, humans, that we actually keep taking care of as human resource workers. And the life of a worker in the next 5-10 years is going to change dramatically. And our goal is to support them in that transition and adjust the best way we can. To start that, I'd actually like to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. The 2 stories are going to be about Jill Watson. So all your task for now is going to be decide who is Jill Watson. One of the story is going to be true. The other story is going to be not. After the 2 stories, I'll give you some time to think about by yourself, figuring out which one is the true and which one is not the true, kind of like the fake story. So in the first place, in this first story, Jill Watson is an HR system. Imagine a place where Jill, who was working 24/7, is scouting all the websites, all the databases, and basically the whole world for talents. It went through resumes, find the data, going through all kinds of systems that we don't even have time to even look at it as humans, and collect the best and match the best talents for positions. Once they're hired, runs the whole onboarding system. In fact, the whole onboarding is personalized and based on role, and everybody feels like they're getting a daily support, and they need questions answered real time. Not only that, but in the long run, Jill is looking for succession planning. So there's no painful human meetings anymore about boxing. She's actually looking into several data sources, the ERP system, how people are performing, the learning management system, what people actually working on, the relationship between people. Every database that we have today in Silo is connected through Jill, who just spends basically her time on figuring out what this data means and who's the best person to succeed some of the managers that are going to be promoted. Not only that, but you, as an HR manager, gets a call on Friday afternoon that you need to put together a report right away for the management. Today, you spend hours and hours on a Friday afternoon, instead of going for a happy hour, building Excel sheets and PowerPoint. Jill can do that in a second, and not only that, but not just showing data, but finding the real insights of what it means. And even if you want, you can actually talk to her and ask her to do this on her own. So by Friday noon, you always have this data, and all you have to do is just figuring out how you want to present that. With that, she actually does that in a conversational manner. So no more coding, no more geeks and IT calls and tickets. It's a little conversation. If you want to take a day off, for example, just tell Jill, like a personal assistant, that you need the next Friday off, and she checks your calendar, moves things, rearranges, gets approval, and things done. So this is number 1 story about Jill Watson. I'll give you a second to think about it, and we move on to the second story of Jill Watson. So imagine Jill as a completely different AI-powered person. This time, Jill is a teaching assistant in a university, an online course, has about 300 students, lots of questions. The last 5 years, about 10,000 questions have been asked throughout this course. Her role with other humans, actual real humans, is to support the learning. So they send us the documents, make checks in with students, and answering their questions about what needs to happen. If someone is late, sends a reminder. So all that happens online throughout this course of 4 or 5 months. She does that so well that at the end, nobody actually noticed that she wasn't even human. In fact, someone at the end, the evaluation, actually at the submission, nominates her as the best TA of the year. So I'll give you 2 seconds to think about, is Jill Watson an HR system? There's all this magic behind the scene, or is Jill Watson a teaching assistant that basically fools humans that she is actually a human? Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you the answer now. We'll get back to that later, because we have another question to ask. Why now? So this artificial intelligence has been around for a while. In fact, like I told you, like 25 years ago, I was already building this machine learning, which kind of like the application of AI. So we've been around for a long time. However, if you look at Google search results, for example, about AI, the last 5 years shoots up in the sky. So something happened in the last 5 years that allowed us to move so fast and speed up development. So two things happened. And this is going to be a little bit of an eye chart. So I don't expect you to actually read those. But if you look at that line, you might be familiar with this graphic. It's a hype cycle. Every technology is kind of going through this cycle. At the very left, when they appear, only the geeks and the visionary know about it. And it slowly makes up all the way to the top. This is the peak of the hype. When the technology reaches that part, everybody thinks that is going to be the next sliced bread, and it's going to resolve every issue in the world. And this is where AI is happening and going now, because AI kind of covers a bunch of technology together. It's like a perfect storm that's coming together. There's mechanics, there's other parts that promote that hold together the AI working together is what makes us puts together a place where we are today. So, for example, natural language processing. The fact that you can talk to Siri, Siri understands, or Alexa understands you, intelligent enough to answer your questions and find solutions. In fact, you can order now on Amazon probably the Whole Foods lineup menu. So all that happened probably the last 5 years development. Other places like spatial recognition, face recognition, 3D printing, there's all this coming together as technology. The other big thing that happened in the last 5 years is data. Now we have so much data out there available, big data, that you might have heard that expression, is that these giant networks, these artificial intelligence networks can read and view that data and learn a lot. Years ago when Siri came out, it was great. You could ask questions, but the answers are kind of silly. That you mention King of Prussia and you get some historical event. So the last 5 years, Siri had actually learned a lot from us as we're using AI, and this is the power of artificial intelligence. The more you use it, the smarter it gets. It actually learns how we work together and figuring out what kind of answers you need as a person or as an organization. So based on that technology, we have the data available, we have these technologies coming together, and we have the powerful machines in the sky somewhere in the cloud that allows us to run. In my 25 years ago, my little network was on a floppy disk. I don't know if you know what a floppy disk anymore. That floppy disk was enough to hold that. This floppy disk is not enough anymore. Right now, we have powerful machines and networks out there that runs that. You don't need that. You don't need to build out. You don't need servers anymore. All you need is just identifying where AI can help you to achieve better, to make people's lives better in the future. So this is why this is happening now, and the next 5-10 years, it's probably even more accelerated process. So now that we know kind of why we are here today, who is AI, what is AI, and then we know why it's happening now, the question is, how is does that magic? So what is behind AI that helps that magical change that's going to basically fundamentally change how we work as humans? So one option, one example to look at is artificial neural network, or we call it machine learning. So the machine learning itself is a concept of showing data to AI, and it reads, looks at the data over and over and over again and learns it. We don't teach anything. We don't write code. We don't like algorithms of explaining. It actually learns by itself, and that's why it's called machine learning. So for example, in my case, I showed lots of numbers, and it just learned what the end result was. Obviously, it's an absolutely useless application because a calculator can do that. But imagine something like marketing or HR looking at data and figuring out patterns in that data. The more data you show and the result, the smarter the system gets. It would be very hard to explain to a system what a ice cream look like. But if you show millions of Instagram pictures where there is somewhere an ice cream, somehow the machine learns what an ice cream is. So it's amazing technology that learns by itself when you work, and the more you work with them, the better they get. Unlike applications that you buy and install, it seems like the more you work, the slower they get. So this whole artificial neural network is the base of learning. They're in the sky somewhere as a service, so you don't need to worry about it. The powerful machines running that algorithm, all you need to do is just connect with your data and figuring out what you want to get out of your data, what you want to learn. So when we look at this evolution of the powerful AI and humans, the human role is changing a little bit. We don't need to spend time anymore digging. What we need to do is figuring out what we want to dig for. And what we get is an insight, a data bunch of things that's out there. The question is not anymore if there's data, but what do you do with the data? And with HR, we make decisions daily. Now we can make actually informed decisions, real-time support decisions. So you don't rely on data that was collected 2 months ago while someone, take 2 weeks to put it into a spreadsheet anymore. So I think the biggest change we're gonna see in the workplace is that we're not relying on manual data and silo of data source collections, and then someone who can actually put that together and merge them, and they maybe biased. It's going to be all automatic. AI is going to learn what to look for, how to look for, and knows how and what you want to get out of that as an HR person. Whatever decisions you need, it supplies the data. It's still you who can make the decision, but you're going to make an informed decision based on what you see. And that's what I think AI, if you can summarize it in one word of how it makes us powerful, is insights. It's rather than data, it's insights. The data is out there. What we need is figuring out what do we do with that, how we make decisions based on the data. So before we move on to what it means for us, HR, and asking the questions that I usually get is whether robots going to be so important, powerful that they're going to replace our jobs. On a return back and tell you the answer before I forget about the question that I had about the HR system versus the assistant. So if you remember, we had Jill Watson described as an HR system as well as a online assistant. So the true version is the online assistant. It was at a university supporting with 9 other humans all through the course, and nobody really noticed that it wasn't human. It answered all the questions, 40% of the questions answered by herself. And at the end, she did get actually nominated as the best TA. So it's not science fiction anymore. It's not something that you watch in Hollywood. It's coming, and it's changing how people work and how we work with this technology. And with that, I think what's important to learn is that the fear that's somehow out there, are rumors that this powerful technology comes in terms of robots and take our jobs. It's not as simple as that. What they take away is those tasks that we're humans doing today, that repetitive, something that's tiring, something that's basically prone to error. Instead, now you have a powerful assistant, almost like a superhuman that you can ask those questions, and it find the answer for you, list the options, and learn how you want to talk to them. Adaptive learning is one of the big things that finally is going to happen. Like today, when we create a course, for example,
it's a content that we mean like for everyone. Nobody is everyone. When you create a course right now, it's about a generic probably approach because we cannot personalize it. Now with this technology, that powerful AI can pick the courses that you need, to get to the next position, the way you want and when you need also. It goes through cross-system communication, so you don't need to have some kind of IT person coming in with API calls to connect two things or two systems. And everything's going to be data-driven. Decision-making is going to be on this powerful real-time support. And on the manufacturing floor, for example, we will get to the point where not only this powerful AI is going to recognize replacement parts, but actually orders what they need to. It checks two systems through global systems and connect that data, ultimately works with you on that. And how it gets smart is that you as human are working alongside with them rather than being replaced by that. And I want to just make mention of that HR system that I described before we move on to Ray, who's going to actually show you exciting, actually work-related examples of the application of AI. So the HR system I described, it wasn't the correct answer. But we're not far from that. In fact, this is where we're going. In 5 years or so, you're going to be able to just simply talk to a system and make sure that what data you need, you get in real time. You don't need to have all these extra silo system anymore. It's all be connected. And what powers us to do is change how we work together as humans. And that means everyone that we are in charge of, all the employees, are going to change their lives. And that change is going to be pretty dramatic in the terms of years. And our role is to understand what's coming up, create a plan and a strategy of how we help them for the adjustment and what's the best way to lift their potentials rather than trying to find out, what's the next big shiny thing. Anymore, we're just working with humans, help them to reach their potentials. And in my passion, learning is going to be finally personalized and what you need and when you need it. So with that, I'm going to turn this into our next speaker, Ray, who's going to probably walk you through examples of great applications of AI.
Zsolt, thank you so much for the introduction and the very wonderful framework that we can work with. I would like to share with you just a few examples, one or two, maybe three, to sort of interpret the framework of AI in the context of what we do each day. And when I reflected on this, I remember a meeting that we had with the CEO of SpaceX, which you're probably more familiar because it's a manufacturing process, Gwen Shotwell. In the entire presentation, which was like about 2 or 3 hours, one of the things that struck me as an HR person is what she said. She said, AI is more reliable than people. Now, for all of us who are in HR, this becomes very controversial because we believe in the potential, the intelligence, and the vision of the capability of the human being, right? Now, but we're seeing a lot of conversation and simply say what's the role of the human mind and human performance within the concept of AI and other technologies. What she was further saying is that in the world of this new type of technologies, there's about 3 different arguments. And the bottom here, the robotics engineers believe that all solutions will be all based on robotics. They don't need AI, they don't need a lot of people. They feel that many of the solutions will be in robotics. That's their bias, of course. Now, those who are specializing in AI, deep learning and learning machines, which are interrelated disciplines, suggest that AI, like what Google is doing on Microsoft and Amazon, believes that it's all going to be artificial intelligence. In fact, robotics would have lesser roles. And us, who are responsible for human resources in between, ask the question that there must be a role for the thinking and the skills of people that will come in. As you would see, whatever you do, whatever we do, we will always be affected by robotics. This is an example of a research that I studied about how small, tiny little nano fish that are sent out into the ocean to conduct research and collect data to measure the change of water temperature and how it impacts our shoreline and tide and how we can anticipate them. So collecting data but using robotics. In the next slide, you will see the micro drones. The role of this is what? In order to do things that people couldn't do, couldn't spend time, couldn't penetrate in potential oil rigs or very unsafe areas. And of course, you talk about many of you in Japan, for example, some of this is happening now already, that elderly care is so acute that they need to have robotics to help people. And finally, when you're looking at this, the most familiar to us is, of course, the hip replacement and the enabling of human performance using robotics. But the key question, therefore, is that we will always be working with robotics. So when we talk about AI, we almost could not separate the concept that we will be working with robotics one way or the other. But from an HR point of view, one interesting question, as an example I'll show you, is how do we identify a 1% high potentials? Now, this is an experience we had started about 3 years ago, and, it's not as pretty as what we want consultants to think it will be pretty, but let me share to you the challenge we faced and the learnings we had. So the large financial institution, the challenge was how to identify very high talent potentials, accelerate their selection, and improve their revenues. Now, these are folks that were handling about $500 million accounts at one point in time. It's not so high, but it is really dominant. The solution was to discover a new way of looking at data so that they can make faster decisions. Now, that was not possible then because if you look at this chart, there was like what I call a hodgepodge of data environment. There's an LCMS, an LMS, there is the CRM, number 2, there is the financial system, number 3, number 4, there's a performance improvement system, and most of the time they were not working with each other. Now, this might be a sound familiar to you in today's environment, and it might continue to be like that. So they were asking the question, and the biggest challenge they were facing was that how do we make our systems work, and what data can we use in order to get the results that we want? The learning that we had was that we have to first understand in our own conversation in the team what really goes on when we begin to talk about AI. Upon conversation, we found out that not very many HR people, especially even those are really experts in HR, have thought about in detail the differences between machine learning and even deep learning. Well, the difference is that machine learning is a machine that sort of understands, learns, stores, and thinks about and learns about what you have provided it as data. Deep learning is amalgamation of all of this machine learning. It does more things like, for example, they create decisions, they create insights, and they provide patterns and behaviors. So then we have to wrap our head around this because we could not even identify what we want to get out of this system and investment. It was not very interesting to just simply say, oh, it will think for us. But what will it think for us? What do we want to let it do for us? So concept number 1 that we have to wrestle with. Because of that, we came up with this very, very interesting, nonsensical example of what I call using how to work with AI in the cucumber factory. The first part is that the simple part of what I call feature extraction is that you can have a plant with all of the cucumbers being sorted out by AI. So AI can learn that. And then the second level, when we talk about classification in AI can begin to compute them and even think about how best way to sort them out. So it's as simple as that. However, it takes a bit of an understanding between these two concepts to really sink in and challenge our minds of how we can to optimize the system because they don't behave the same way as the other software that we're familiar with or we've been exposed to. Furthermore, upon conversation, issues came up like, what's the difference between the different types of machine learning? And number one is that supervised means that's root learning. You sort of fed the machine with data, and this is what's very common to a lot of people because it helped process things faster, but it's still been very, very supervised. Then the unsupervised level is what Zsolt was saying earlier about how the machine can actually figure out things, learn from the data that you put in. They can set their own ideas of what to do with it. And then the finer concept, which is really deep learning and the promise of machine learning, is the fact that once it sees the patterns, it could suggest, it could actually recommend, it could pretend, it could show, and it could demonstrate some rules in order to get what you want. So having experienced this three framework of understanding, one of my biggest learning was that HR executives, managers who wants to go to AI must begin to understand how systems, AI system work, at least fundamentally. So when you go into a conversations with AI engineers and AI architects and robotics expert, you begin to understand thoroughly, at least a certain conversation, that you guide finally what outcome you want to get because you understand how the systems work. So going back to our example, what we found out in our own little experience was we were able to add capacities, real-time interaction between performance, learning, and coaching. And we learned later on that it was not the most smartest, the brightest thing that AI can do, but we were so happy because we achieved it. So even a small step was able to help us accomplish it. First, we took the information on the financial activities and the results of every account person. With that data, we integrated that simultaneously with the data that says if there is a variance in performance, real time, pose a learning, training, design for that person without any consultation to any human being. It just sort of programs itself to identify that if there are variances in this part of the task skills required performance area, that they're served by the system some level of information, some level of training, and some level of help. That's what you call the learning actions. And this happened real time. The third component was that because the managers of these executives, the vice presidents, are aware of the variances in performance and the program they need to do, they were given alerts. This is real time. So they had coaching conversation. Now, when they meet every other day, one-on-one, they look at the numbers. They just don't look at the numbers on the variance, but they look at the number on whether these persons receive training or that this person could get help more with coaching or mentoring with somebody else. Because this was happening so fast, real time, there was no search to do, there was no query to do, the report was just there. It significantly increased the probability and the likelihood and the use of data in order for the executives in order to accomplish their work. So again, after looking at this, we were saying some of the critics in AI was telling us, no, what you've done was a very tiny step in AI. I said, yeah, tiny, but it's heaven for us because we could not extract this in a speed that we wanted in the past, right? So very, very simple, modest, but significant to the eyes of the people that we work with. Additional thing we understood was this, and this is, I think, our biggest insight. We could actually add capacities more if we add additional data collection in order to help us generate insight. So this is where there's an argument that although AI can figure it out and ask questions and can learn, it also needs some prompt. It also needs some guidance in terms of what you want to test. So what we have done was to observe what type of questions these executives were asking, when they're asking, and the priority of questions they were asking. So there was a loop into the coaching questions. So we added data to collect to capture profiles of performance and questions and needs. The conclusion was very interesting, at least to what our findings here, is that those who ask more questions are likely to perform higher based on the data, but not anecdotally. See, we seem to know this anecdotally, that when people are very interested, they're eager, they want to solve problems, they want to fix things, they tend to perform better. But that is anecdotal. But here we could actually link and say that the more people are able to ask questions and get answers quickly, they're likely going to improve their performance. Therefore, they become better as a potential to the organization. So reflecting on this was kind of interesting experience. What we learned primarily is the fact that you can do things faster by machine learning. You could identify, track top 1% by machine learning, patterns and profiles by deep learning. Now, we barely scratched this thing, and we're happy already just because of the speed and some of the thinking process that it's done. One of the most crucial things, to recap this experiment, is that learning machines can really help you discover something. And then we ask more questions. The more questions you ask, the more answers you're going to get. We add the data, collecting points so we grow together with the learning machines. Although the learning machines can figure out things, you also have to prompt and redirect learning machines in order to satisfy your information. Meaning to say, yeah, it's great, it can do the thinking, but you really have to do the thinking for the machine so that it can keep on moving forward. I remember a scientist I spoke, and he said, in science, when you discover one data, it doesn't end there. The next question is, what do you want to do next? The learning machine sometimes doesn't answer what do you want to do next. It offers you options. The question is how you, as an HR director, what do you want to do next? And that's actually where the slowest part of the conversation, because now you have to have human being conversations in order to understand what's the best options that you want to take. So understand that there's always an interplay between AI and human decision making as you move forward. So people adapt slower, as I mentioned to you. And I don't think it's because it's slower per se, but because our decision making is different from AI. The conclusion we have from the study is that project leaders need computational skills, meaning to say there's so much growth in the field of AI and robotics that HR executives have had not enough chance to really understand fundamentally the making of the systems and how you really use it in HR or learning or talent management. So that's why when we get the outcome, we were so happy without even understanding that everybody. So we're trying to do a lot of guesswork. But the conclusion is that we'd probably do a lot better if we studied a little bit more about learning machines. The second experience I have is about a small project with Homeland Security. I spoke with a chief learning officer, and they said their problem is not up-to-date knowledge. Their problem is obsolescence of knowledge. So if there's a solution a week ago, it could be old today. So how do you train? How do you train people? How do you update people of what is going to happen? So fundamentally, what we have done was to use a text messaging system. So everybody in that certain division that we work with could post in by text. I said, what do I need to fix, to solve, and to improve? And where do I find the answer? And what's the key of the idea that I need to put in? So when they answer these three questions, they put it in their text, it's submitted to an AI system, and the AI system collects whatever information it can gather within all the other contributions of everyone and serves the answer. So no longer is it a situation where they wait for an answer for a course or for a bulletin or for the alert. Everyone's questions provides an answer, and everybody can answer, and AI systems sort them out, clarifies them out, builds them together, and present it. So these are text questions, very simple text questions. Context, instantaneous, idea being on the brain, on the messages very quickly, and supported by an AI. Now, there are many systems like this, and if you send me your email through Abby, I would be happy to send you a link to this example and a case paper on this area. Another example is, this is just the page that we use, but I can show it to you in an actual demo when I get your request. Finally, there's a growth right now. I think Deloitte has been talking about digital learning. It says that in the first generation of e-learning and digital learning using technology, we're all content-driven, meaning to say the answer comes from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from heaven or corporate office, and it's plugged down to everybody else. So we call it a formal learning process. The second part answer now is that no longer is not sufficient. In fact, part of the digital strategy that Deloitte has been publishing about is that for organizations to compete successfully, it has to find a way to leverage the knowledge of its own workers that they learn every day. So there's a loss of talent in organizations. There's a rapid demand of expertise. Question is, how do you commoditize this expertise? Our definition of expertise is you have to go to 10,000 hours of experience. We could not survive in organizations if we rely on our expertise defined that way. So one of the things that we have tried to experiment, and this is my personal interest up to today, is that there is a phenomenon in many organizations now which we call the expert, the beginner expert. The beginner expert is someone who may not have 10,000 hours, but is an expert at something. He might have spent 6 months on it, a programmer, a developer, a designer, a writer, or a manager who really dealt on that. That person is an expert. If we redefine our explanation and understanding of expertise, that person has a value in the organization. So one of the framework to change is that expertise is not a destination. Expertise is what you have today to contribute. So many of them are an intermediate, and then many of them are expert. The expertise is very small. It's a small percentage. So the idea is how do we bring in the beginners so quickly so they become intermediate as quickly as possible. So what this experiment shows to us is that the more we accelerate the contribution of people, the more we are likely going to be able to allow everybody to hear out and to listen what they're doing. So this is what we have done. We have built a software which is driven partly with artificial intelligence. And by the way, AI works, but it can work with other software as well, and that's the good thing about it. It can be interdependent with other software because other software is also specialized. So we call it micro-expert. What it does is really very simple. In an organization, everybody is required to submit a situation, any problem, a jam, a broken part, a part of missing inventory, a slowdown in operation, a oil leak, a bearing issue, any problems that they don't know how to solve. So everybody submits that. When they submit that, they also are required to offer what they have thought about it and what they have done, which is critical because if they only submit a problem and they don't put in what they've tried to do, it's futile. So they bring in their own opinion. So as everybody does that, simultaneously, those who are being invited to comment on it are also able to provide the answers very quickly and instantaneously. Every one of those jobs create what you call a pattern whereby they are collecting the information, the similarities, the comparisons, the relatedness of different issues, and they're sorted out by the AI system in order for the person who goes in, he or she would have virtually an introduction to what might be an answer to the solution. The moment he types his request or her request for a problem, it automatically serves the potential solution. Now, this is AI because what it does is that it doesn't wait. It doesn't wait for an instruction from someone to serve it. It will give its own reading of what might be the likelihood of these answers, and it allows, therefore, the person to have better control of what they think is valuable to them. So in this example, what we have simply learned was that there are many ways to learn, but you can now personalize deep thinking by members of a factory or management because you allow them AI to support their learning rather than a very silo, a very expert system driven, which doesn't communicate to any other alternative way of thinking in their behalf. So biggest learning was that we learned dynamic expertise can all be at the same time. So even if I only have a small expertise on it, if I can contribute it today, I would have compounding effects to it. So we need to change the mentality foremost even before we can optimize AI in this regard, or vice versa. We try AI and then let's see if people will use it. A few words that I discovered. I attended a project at Caltech, and this is a chemistry lab, and there were millions of dollars of robotic systems there. The graduate students don't want to touch the robotics. Why? They fear it because it might break, because it's very costly. So what the professor did was this. It's a very interesting story. The professor said, okay, all of you go to the internet, go to eBay, and find all of the components of this very expensive robotic system. After a while, everybody found the components of that robotic system. Then the next step, why don't you rebuild using your eBay components with this particular robotics? And they did. They did successfully. So they deconstructed the process in their mind that these expensive robotic systems are actually just fancy, high-grade, developed systems, but the principles that work for them, they can reconstruct. Having this story makes me wonder and makes me enlightened to the fact that human beings, depends on how they're thinking, can really accomplish a lot more in order to understand, to optimize machines. Going back to SpaceX, there's an argument right now between NASA and SpaceX. Do we allow the pilots to just be passengers and AI systems will run Dragon 2? Or to what extent do we allow the pilots to influence it? The argument that Gwen Shotwell says is that what happens, and I will leave this to you to ponder right now, what happens if there are situations where the astronauts, not the pilots, the astronauts have never been trained for? Who takes over? And that's a very provocative question. What they're suggesting is that in most cases than not, you cannot train the astronauts to the point that they can anticipate everything. That's for you to think about. Finally, I want to invite you to read Tom Friedman's book on Thank You for Being Late. It's very fascinating reading because it reminds us that this revolution, as what's mentioned to you earlier, has happened many years ago. It's only having a center point right now. A lot of companies are investing in it. So if you're looking at it today, you're actually looking at it and you're late. And it's okay to be late, according to Tom Friedman. It's okay to be late because now you need to be able to reflect on this and see how it can add value to what you do in HR. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Abby or Short for questions and answers.
Great. Well, thank you, Ray, and thank you so much, Zsolt, for your really insightful presentations. I want to thank, again, our sponsor, AI Works by Works Applications, for sponsoring this live event as well. Before we go into our Q&A, I do want to quickly remind the audience you still have time to submit questions by typing them into the corresponding box on your screen. Again, we will do our very best to answer them in the time we have left. Okay, so moving into questions, Zsolt, I'm going to start with you because it's been a moment since we've heard from you. And I want to start out with this question. How is the role of learning and development changing in this AI-driven new paradigm?
So that's a great question. And if you've been in L&D or not talent management, better to say, in the last 10 years, you've seen that the change is already here and already coming. Traditionally, talent development was about creating content and distribute content for those who need it so they can learn more and then, achieve their goals. The problem with that traditional approach, one, is that in today's world, we're just so fast-paced that by the time you collect the information, you package the information, you create the training, it's expensive and it's already late. And that's one. Two is that not everyone needs the same information the same way. There are certain needs when all I need is an answer. And I don't really need a 15-minute training on something when in the middle of the training is my answer that I want. So I think where we're going today from talent development is people demand the same type of access, real-time access to information just like in the world. They have their iPhones, they have their whatever their phones they have. Outside of work, they find information very quickly. If you want to change your tire and you have no clue about it, you pull up your YouTube. If your sink is broken, you pull up a YouTube video. You don't need to take and sign up for a training. So once we start measuring real things of behavioral change and how we want to help, then we kind of moving away from the content creation. There's going to be still learning needs that we drive, but when we can really focus on things that matter, creative way to create skill-based training, and let all the information that they need, that they don't need to memorize, share. And just like Ray mentioned in that example, let them share all the information that they have, connect very quickly. So our role is going to be more like a matchmaker, curator, and partly providing learning rather than creating content as traditionally used to be.
Okay, great. And Ray, I want to move on to you next. We have a question. What strategies work in AI implementation?
Thanks, Abby. That's a good question. And I think that for many of you who have been doing software implementation, there is a strong temptation to do something that is like, hey, I have a favorite project. I have this big compensation system that I think I should really put a driver and improve it by putting AI into it. And that might be the right move to do. Imagine that in every organization there is a strategy, especially in manufacturing. There's a strategy. There is a push for productive capacities. There's a lot of applications of automations, robotics. It's happening. AI is happening and robotics is happening even if HR is not following it. So it's a world in itself. So one of the biggest things that I discovered was that, number one, look for a window whereby there is an existing AI push and reflect on what is the ramification of that AI push in terms of HR. And the reason being that if they are hiring 10,000 people because they have this new robotic technology that needed to be supported with 10,000 people, a new inventory system like Amazon is just hiring 50,000 people somewhere, there's a technology that sits beside it. And it makes relevant because now you are in parallel, in tandem, working with this unit, a manufacturing unit, and say, let's get thinking on how we can help you out in that area. The budget might be there, and the language is there, the push is there, and the like. If you want to do it on a strategy whereby you want to experiment, even if you're very large, I'm always biased with the idea of get a crew or group, a skunk works, get a team of people to wet yourself about AI. I mean, you can actually go to Amazon or Microsoft and Google and get their agents, their AI system, and experiment to doing this. Do chatbots, do learning design using AI, like what we did with the Homeland Security, to just get to understand the extent of what's planning required, the investment required, the talent required in order to make it run. So in a way, it's kind of a prototyping, but you can make it smaller and calculate it, and then you can ramp it up into other bigger applications as you mature in your requirements. So both very pragmatic approach, and I have nothing against a huge strategy if there is one, but short of that, do these two things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then this next question I think is quite salient for our readership and all of the manufacturers in our audience right now. So I'm just going to read it to you, and then Zsolt, if you would like to start, and then Ray, if you have any follow-up, I would love to hear it. So the question is, recruiters struggle with finding and engaging new talent every day. How can AI help recruiters win candidates over? And Zsolt, I'd love to start with you first if you have a response.
Sure. So I think what we all know what recruiters do, calling people, finding out what they need. So with AI, what can happen is all this manual work, upfront work can be done in the background. So AI goes through all the resumes, find and match with descriptions in a large scale and pick the best ones. But also what's happening most of the time is that a recruiter doesn't have 24/7 the answer questions, and sometimes keep them engaged to ask simple questions and answer in a timely manner helps talent to feel like there's progress and they know where they are. And then you can use that for a simple bot that we might hear and learn about interacting with other businesses as well. So quick answers, back and forth, finding the right answer, meanwhile figuring out what the best talent match is. A little bit like a Match.com type of thing, automated. But there's still the human factor in that to move forward after that, obviously.
One of my thoughts for recruiting is basically if you're a recruiting company, if you are in manufacturing recruiting, is really how do you bring in those people so that they get closer to who you are, what you are, and what you want to do with them. If you have an external recruiter, the recruiting process is almost like separate from the company. I think we need to find an innovation using AI whereby you shorten that process so that there's an immediate conversation between potential needs of job and actual solutions that the person can put in. For example, you use a lot of resume making. But even if AI can search all of this resume, to some extent, there's a closer process whereby you determine what the person can do. So maybe to engage them, to get good people, is to put them into an actual work situation, maybe virtual or not, so that they can see if they can do the project. So maybe the cost is higher, but if AI is helping out, you could develop a system, like there's a lot of language system right now that can do it. There's a lot of essay writing system that can do it. Give them tasks. If they're good potentials, give them tasks so that they know whether they match into your requirements. For me, that's high engagement, which you don't do right now. A lot of recruitments right now are all pipeline systems, looking for people, reading resume. We need to use AI to find a more innovative way to bring those people in closer to real jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. I'm going to direct it at both of you. And Zsolt, you can answer first again. And the question is, we've covered so much ground here today. You guys have both done a really excellent job with setting up, giving us some good context for where the flow of this conversation is going and how it can be applied in HR. So Zsolt, and we'll start with you. I was wondering if you could leave our audience with one sort of last key takeaway or one final thought in closing. Or Ray, you could start as well.
Yeah, one of my biggest insights, and of course I have a bias because I'm an HR person, but I'm also a technology person. One of my biggest bias was that we're trying to accelerate things. And I know we're trying to accelerate it for results. But being corny, I think we're trying to really accelerate to add more time for our minds and our humanity to be restored back. More and more work by muscles will be replaced, and that's a reality. So there's more opportunity for us to really define work. The future of work is different. That's the biggest thing, which is exciting, because we can use our brains more rather than our pens and paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Zsolt, do you have a closing thought you'd like to leave the audience with?
So definitely, so one thing that I want to leave the audience with about this accelerating AI technology is that the human factor, the the fact that we're going to still be there, our role might change, but we still are responsible for making the decisions. But now we may be able to better decisions, faster decisions, and more data-driven decisions in the future.
And I think that's a great way to close out the webinar. Thank you guys so much. That wraps up today's webinar, How Artificial Intelligence Can Improve Human Resource Management and Talent Development. Thanks so much to everyone in the audience for those really great questions. And of course, thank you again to Ray and Zsolt for their insightful answers. Now, if you'd like to take another look at this webinar or share it with a colleague, it will be available for on-demand viewing starting tomorrow. Also, if you'd like to learn more about how AI can improve your HR management and talent development, I'd really encourage you to check out 2 white papers we've written alongside Works applications. They offer an even deeper dive into the impact AI can have within your manufacturing enterprise, and they're both available for free at manufacturing.net. And if you're in the area, come see AI Works by Works Applications in action at HR Tech in Las Vegas, October 10th through 12th. They'll be demonstrating some of their HR software that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning. Okay, well that concludes today's presentation, everyone. Thanks again in attendance for tuning in. Thanks to our excellent speakers, and of course, a final thank you to our sponsor, AI Works by Works Applications. Ray and Zsolt, have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Have fun.